Thank you very much for participating to this memorial for John Michael Daly, who unfortunately passed away suddenly in March of this year. We would have loved to have everybody here in Uri's auditorium. Unfortunately, the persistent COVID pandemic doesn't allow us to do that safely. And therefore, I'm really extending a thank you for everybody here and for everybody connected through Zoom to this ceremony and to this event. I'm Fabrizio Michelassi. I'm the current chairman of the Department of Surgery at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Weill Cornell Medicine. And John preceded me as a chairman of the Department of Surgery from 1993 to 2002. He was raised in Philadelphia, a city which he loved, a city where he went back multiple times for friends, for family, for jobs. He was the first one in his family, in his immediate family, to go into medicine. And after graduation from medical school in 1973, he did his general surgery residency at the University of Texas in Houston under the leadership of Stanley Dudrick, a very famous surgeon who is recognized for major contribution to total parental nutrition. John's experience in Houston at MD Anderson Cancer Center laid the foundation for his later career as a broad surgical oncologist. And in 1980, he was recruited to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, where he joined the colorectal service and eventually became the acting chief of the colorectal surgery service at Memorial. And Dr. Alexandre Swistel knew him then, and I'm pleased that he has accepted to come to the podium and share some remembrances with us. Dr. Swistel.
Thank you, Dr. Michelassi. It's an honor and a privilege. So I'd like to say a few words about, and of course, some personal observations about my dear friend and former colleague, Dr. Daly. I met John as a surgical oncology fellow at Memorial Sloan Kettering in 1981. He actually was the program director at that time for the fellows, and so we kind of bonded. You know, from the very start, it was clear that here was a special person. He was someone who was genuinely compassionate, he was thoughtful, and he was such a sensitive individual to all our needs and cares. We were terrified back then. Sometimes still will be, but thinking about those days. But it was very nice to have a mentor, and he really became a mentor for me during my time there. He became a role model, and the most important thing that he taught me at that time was it was important to whatever you do in your life, try to always do things better. Try to do better things for your patient, improve their care, and be innovative. Innovative is a special watchword. He was always into innovation, and he instilled that in me. Now, after I finished training there, I went over to the west side of town and became attending at St. Luke's. But you know what? The friendship continued, and not only that, the collaboration. It was work that I had done while a fellow. Kind of talk about innovation. This was looking to how to treat tumors by actually using arterial. I'm not going to be too clinical, but anyway, using chemotherapy in the arterial system to directly hit the tumor. Well, this was a really neat idea that Dr. Daly decided that we would do a cross-campus collaboration, and we actually started treating liver tumors. I on the west side, he on the east side, with putting these pumps in where we would treat the actual liver tumor with the intra-arterial injection. Talk about innovation. That was quite pioneering. Anyway, we continued to be in touch even after he left back to Philadelphia, but then he did come back to New York, as you all heard, and he became chairman here at what was then the New York Hospital. And he, at the time, realized that there was a big change in surgery occurring. And that is that the days of what I like to call the omnisurgeon or the general surgeon who did all things, this was starting to change. And it was changing into a shift into specialization. So I'm forever grateful for his taking a chance on me. And he actually asked me to come and help in this form of specialized care. And he made me a member of the faculty here. And he called on me to start the very first breast cancer service, surgical service here at Cornell. And that was back in 1996. So innovation was again the watchword. And with his help and with the blessings of Drs. Pardis, Corman, a major donor gift from Miss Iris Cantor, his dream and mine was fulfilled here at Cornell. And with his guidance, we were able to start the very first, most innovative breast cancer center in the whole tri-state area. And this continues. This dream of mine has continued, and with Dr. Rasha Simmons subsequently, and now most recently Dr. Lisa Newman, they have continued this tradition of innovation. Finally, he was the kind of person that, despite his stature, he could make you feel special. And that included his family and his friends. He was so devoted to his family and so very proud of all his family. And, you know, he and Mary put together a special kind of relationship together, and it was family bonding. And the thing that I remember most about that was he used to open up his house during Christmas time, and we would have a large party, and everyone was there, and the whole surgical team was invited, and we suddenly felt that we were part of this grand group of wonderful people. So even after he left New York, he and I stayed in touch. We even quite randomly, most recently, within the last 2 years, found ourselves on the same cruise, the exact same time, going from London to Barcelona. And boy, did we have a ball. We went and saw so many places, were able to tour together. We talked a lot about all kinds of old memories. And my wife and I were able to then meet his new wife, Palma, who was an absolute delight. Well, I'd like to end with a quote from Sir William Osler. He always inspires. And this quote epitomizes what I think was John's approach to his life and his practice, but specifically medicine. So here's the quote. The practice of medicine is an art and not a trade. It's a calling and not a business, but it's a calling in which your heart will be exercised equally with your head. John understood that, and he relished this art of medicine in all his successes. He was loved by all, and he is missed by all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Swisto. In 1986, John Daly returned to Philadelphia to become the Jonathan Rhodes Professor of Surgery at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital. At Penn, he distinguished himself as a very skilled, very compassionate, very busy surgical oncologist. And Dr. Michael Lieberman met him then, and he will share some remembrances of John Daly with us. Dr. Lieberman, please.
Good afternoon. I as well am honored to be able to recount some memories of Dr. Daly, who is, of course, my former boss mentor. Dr. John Daly was my mentor, at times big brother, and always a friend. When I was a resident at the University of Pennsylvania, he taught me surgical techniques and how best to care for complex patients with cancer. Dr. Daly was a superb technical surgeon, a surgeon's surgeon. However, the most important lesson I learned from Dr. Daly was the importance of family. He was a terrific father, an even better husband. I fondly recall Dr. Daly recounting stories of family vacations and all the activities with Maureen and the boys. He loved his family, and I knew that was his number one priority. Dr. Daly and I had a special bond through personal adversity. We both cared for each other's spouses when they were ill. My wife, Phyllis, was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease when I was a resident at Penn, and Dr. Daly operated upon her and supported us through treatment. A few years later, I helped care for Mary Daly when she was ill. I will never forget the great care he gave Phyllis and the trust he placed in me with Mary's care. Dr. Daly was a great mentor and teacher. He instructed me in the clinics, served as my research advisor in residency, hired me to my first and only academic position, and even provided me with patients. I remember one day Dr. Daly had 2 patients, both of whom needed a Whipple procedure, and he wanted to know if I could do one of the procedures. As a raw surgical attending, I was delighted with the opportunity. The night before the surgery, Dr. Daly introduced me to the patient that I was going to operate upon. It turns out he was rather morbidly obese, had significant pancreatitis and a large tumor, and a long list of comorbidities. Dr. Daly's patient was a vibrant, thin woman with a small ampullary tumor. There's a little difference in terms of things for you guys, one a little harder than the other. Anyway, I guess that day, Dr. Daly taught me to be careful for what you wish for, or alternatively, rank has its privileges. Either way, 12 hours later, as I limped out of the operating room, I remember Dr. Daly with his big, great smile, smiling at me as I crawled out of the room. Dr. Daly was a one-of-a-kind person who made a great positive impact in so many people's lives, patients, students, colleagues, friends, and family. Whenever I think of Dr. Daly, a smile comes to my face. I'll never forever remember him and deeply miss my friend and mentor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lieberman. I knew that Dr. Daly had great judgment, and you demonstrated that over again. Thank you. In 1992, Dr. Daly was contacted by Dr. David Skinner, then the president of New York Hospital, to consider becoming the chairman of the Department of Surgery here. When Dr. Daly arrived at the Department of Surgery was comprised by many superb private voluntary surgeons and some of the core faculty of full-time faculty. Dr. Daly, who recruited a large number of key faculty members, completed the transition, which had been started by Dr. Shires, to a department consisting almost exclusively of full-time faculty. Dr. Thomas Fay was one of the faculty recruited, and he will share some of his remembrances with us. After Dr. Fay, Patty Sullivan Jakubaskas, Dr. Daly's assistant, will also do the same, and she will be followed by Dr. Vinny Malhotra, Vice Chair of Anesthesia, who will also share a few remembrances with us. Dr. Fay.
Good afternoon. Thank you for asking me to be part of Dr. Daly's memorial service. It certainly is a great honor. He was a wonderful man, and I have many fond remembrances, as Alex does. I didn't know that Alex and I were recruited the same year, but that is when I returned to Cornell in 1996 and recruited by Dr. Daly. I also remember very fondly how the home was opened, and when I first met Maureen, I believe she was probably 7, running around the house, and really was a real treat to have her come here as a resident, having known Dr. Daly so well, and then ultimately been my fellow last year. For those of you who don't know, Maureen's absence is very much warranted, as she just delivered a new baby yesterday, John David Moore, a little boy. So she is, I believe, watching by Zoom, and Dr. Daly's legacy, I believe, will go on for many years with his new grandson. Dr. Daly was a really a fun chairman. I had, he was one of the folks you could just kind of walk into his office and he'd say, sit down, and he always would make time for you. Usually that was late at night for both of us. He did have a tremendous a work ethic, which I think he instilled in those of us who were working under him. He was, as some of the residents referred to, a gladiator surgeon, really fearless in the operating room and taking on some of the most difficult cases. And despite the fact that he was crafting a department that was super, kind of subspecialized, he still, was doing everything from esophagectomies to rectal cancers, and was able to do that, brilliantly. I have to thank Dr. Daly also for getting me involved as in the resident training. That story is a little bit of a funny one, so I'll tell you. At that time there was a big emphasis in New York, which had preceded the rest of the country, on resident work hours. And, we were struggling, having been the, ground zero of resident work hours, still trying to get surgical residents to get to an 80-hour work week. And at the time, there had been these kind of shell false schedules, and, people were still doing what they had done 10 years ago when I had been a resident. And then one day there was a DA in Brooklyn, I think his name was Hines, who came out and said he was going to prosecute any program director that was found to be supporting the violation of work hours. Well, that afternoon, I got a call from Dr. Daly. Thomas, why don't you come to my office? He had adopted a somewhat of a Texas accent, despite his Philadelphia. We used to joke he was from southern Philadelphia. And he called me into the office and said, Thomas, I'd like you to be the new program director. And I was like, geez, thanks, Dr. Daly. And then I saw the headlines in the Post as I was leaving the office. DA Hines to prosecute any program director. So I was like, But it was actually a great moment in my career. I've been in the residency program and training residents and been very, very happy doing that. Some of my best relationships have been with trainees and still are. And so I thank Dr. Daly effusively for getting me involved in the residency program. I'll just close by saying he really, I think, inspired, in addition to excellent surgical technique academics, and was the one who got me set up in a lab here, and got my research career really off the ground as well. And he's been, he even up until his untimely passing 6 months ago, he really was still a mentor when it came to research and things like that. So he is and will be sorely missed. Fortunately, I have your sister Maureen to still talk to every week, or at least, and I look forward to continuing to do that and being part of the Daly family for many years to come. So thank you.
I've had the privilege of working in the chairman's office of the Department of Surgery at Weill Cornell for the past 25 years. And my career here began with Dr. John Daly. You've just heard testimony of Dr. John Daly's past accomplishments in the world of surgery, but it's my distinct pleasure to tell you about John Daly, the husband, the father, the friend. Dr. Daly joined New York Presbyterian back in 1993 as chairman of the Department of Surgery, and I began working with him in February of 1996 through 2002. From the beginning, our office had a very caring and supportive team. There were many achievements made by Dr. Daly in the surgery department during his tenure here, and he received numerous awards and honors throughout his career. The national and international surgical conferences Dr. Daly hosted here in New York were quite spectacular. Who else could arrange to have an off-Broadway singer join the Holstead Society dinner and sing a Holstead rendition of All That Jazz, which included the names of each of the co-hosts and their wives? Who else managed to arrange for front row theater tickets to Chicago for the entire International Surgical Group delegation that visited New York? I can certainly say that Dr. Daly acquired a New York flair since coming here from his hometown of Philadelphia. And no, he certainly brought it back to Philadelphia to show them how it's done. Dr. Daly was well known as an excellent surgeon and an outstanding leader, but he was also a caring family man, always making time to enjoy his family life with his wife, Mary, and his 6 children, John Jr., William, Brian, Timothy, Patrick, and Maureen. He would rush home with excitement on his night to cook for the family, which usually consisted of his famous spaghetti dinner or love of hot dogs. They raised 6 equally terrific children and were so proud of each one of them. He always said his family was his best accomplishment. Mrs. Mary Daly was a special person to the surgery department as well. She had enormous spirit and was truly gracious and always had a smile. She and I shared so many conversations about family, as well as our mutual love of everything Irish. The Dalys open the door to their home for all of us every year at the department's annual holiday party, and were the most gracious host and hostess. 19 years ago in October, we gathered in Griffith's Faculty Club for a farewell reception to say goodbye to Dr. and Mrs. Daly and their family as they returned to their hometown of Philadelphia, where he became dean at Temple University School of Medicine. The following year, after they moved to Philadelphia, my husband George and I were married the day of the New York City blackout. But the Dalys didn't just show up at the evening reception when the lights and the air conditioning came back on. They drove from Philadelphia during the blackout and arrived at the church in 95-degree weather, saying, "Congratulations, you two really know how to choose a wedding day." They joined our wedding reception along with Dr. and Mrs. Stubenboard and several of the office staff, and it was a really nice reunion. During all the years we worked together, we had a great working relationship with many memorable moments. Dr. Daly received letters on a regular basis from many of his patients thanking him for many years of life since having their cancer surgeries performed by him here at Weill Cornell. These letters alone were quite a tribute to Dr. Daly and showed how much his patients also cared for him. Our own personal families connected with each other as well, as Dr. Lieberman also said. Dr. Daly, along with a team of doctors, including Dr. Nannis, helped to diagnose and care for my father, who had kidney cancer. They gave my father a few additional years of life where he was able to meet my future husband, George. My father, and was able to see and enjoy two beautiful granddaughters that were born during those years. My mother and family were truly grateful and thanked him for all he did for us. And Dr. Daly simply replied, "We're all family at Cornell." Years later, when his loving wife, Mary, died after her heroic battle with cancer, Dr. Daly thanked me for my support during Mary's surgery and subsequent treatments. And I simply returned the reply by saying, "We are all family." Every year, we would meet for dinner at the American College Clinical Congress as an annual tradition. As time passed, his daughter Maureen began joining him both as a medical student and as a surgical resident. I remember how elated he was to introduce his daughter to his colleagues, watch her presentations, and have another surgeon in the family. Years later, Dr. Daly met his future wife, Palma, and he was happy to introduce George and I to her. And it was certainly a pleasure to get to know Palma over these years as well. On February 12th of this year, I received a phone call in the office. It was Dr. Daly. And he said, "I hope you do not think that I forgot about this special anniversary day for you in the office," and congratulated me on 25 years of service at Weill Cornell. We reminisced about the office and talked about our growing families, including the fact that George and I had 13 grandchildren and that he and Palma were finally catching up to us. Little did I know that would be the last time I would speak to my colleague and friends. Although George and I were deeply saddened to hear the sudden loss of Dr. Daly, I will always be grateful for that phone call and happy that we were just in touch before his passing. Now, years later, it's wonderful to see all of the Daly children here grown with families of their own. I've had the honor to work with Dr. Daly's daughter, Dr. Maureen Moore, when she was an administrative chief resident here at New York Presbyterian in the same surgical department that her dad once led as a surgery chair. John, William, Brian, Timothy, Patrick, Maureen, and Palma, thank you for your friendship and allowing me to memorialize just a small part of Dr. Daly's large life. It was an honor to have called Dr. Daly not only my former boss, but a true friend, and he will be sorely missed. Honoring the proud Irish heritage of both of our families, the Dalys and the Sullivans, and on behalf of the many Irish surgical registrars that traveled to Weill Cornell to join Dr. Daly's work in the research laboratory for 2 years before returning to Ireland, I would like to close with a special Irish blessing. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind always be at your back. May the sun shine warm on your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone in URIS Auditorium, and those of you who are watching this live via Zoom or other video platform. As Dr. Michalasi already introduced me, I'm Vinny Malhotra, Vice Chair for Anesthesiology, and I've been here for nearly 46 years. Now, it is indeed an opportunity and an honor. Thank you, Dr. Michalasi, for inviting me to speak, to say a few words about a dear friend and a colleague, Dr. John Daly. John and I worked together very frequently in the operating room as I took care of anesthesia for nearly all his patients. We also worked together outside the operating room, since he was the chair of the operating room committee and I was the clinical director of the operating rooms, to share our vision about efficient and effective working of the operating rooms. In the operating room, I was always impressed with his passion for surgery, his outstanding skills. As Mike already said, he was a surgeon's surgeon. And his passion for education of the future generation of surgeons, a passion that we both shared. What started as a professional association very soon became a personal one, and based on common values, mutual respects, we shared quite a bit of our family information. I'm sorry to say today, it was always referred very fondly as Mary, the boys, and Maureen. So I know you're here. And Maureen, wherever you're watching from, I must say that I have reasons to believe that growing up, you were a model child and rarely got into mischief. But I'm also certain that if you did, you had a lot of leverage with your dad. When Maureen received her Distinguished House Staff Award at Griffiths in 2019, John made a special trip from Philadelphia to come and be here. And that was a proud dad moment for him. And he indicated to me that all that travel was well worth it for just that occasion. And that was his family moment. Another moment that I remember is when he was waiting in the family waiting area on Greenberg 3 when one of his grandchildren was having surgery over here. I walked over to him, we chatted a bit, and I offered him the use of my office, which is conveniently located close to the operating rooms, to have some privacy and some more comfort. But it was apparent to me that at that moment, his only focus was the well-being of his beloved grandson. And just like any doting father would do, he preferred to stay in the family area. And that was his family moment. Another one of his personal attributes that comes to mind is his loyalty to institutions that he was associated with. When he chose to go to Philadelphia, to Temple University School of Medicine as their dean, I recall our conversation when I asked John, I said, John, you have really brought the surgical department way along. You're the pinnacle of your success and you have opportunities abound. Why would you want to trade this to go back to Philadelphia and deal with all the structural, functional, and fiscal problems Temple is having? His simple answer to me was, and I quote, Vinny, that's my alma mater, and I see this as my calling and my duty, unquote. And such was his commitment as a person. Now, John also loved golf. We shared that commonly. I used to play at Pelham. John joined Pelham Country Club and he was very proud to be a member of it. He announced it at the Pelham outings and made sure we all saw his locker. I knew Tito, the locker attendant, when once I went to play at Pelham, directed me straight to Dr. John Daly's locker. He said, well, he told me you can use it when he's not around. So he also was an avid supporter of education. And what good way to combine the two passions than by establishing an annual surgery golf outing, whereby all the funds raised at the Pelham Country Club outing are used to further the academic interests and missions of the surgery department. And that is his legacy with us. In closing, all I would say is that the way I shall always remember him is someone who was passionate about his family, about his friends, and the institutions that he worked with. And he was always a kind and caring doctor to his patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fay. Thank you, Patty. And thank you, Dr. Malhotra. As already mentioned several times, Dr. John Daly was chairman of the Department of Surgery here for 9 years. And during that time, as every chair, he had an outstanding relationship with both the dean's office and the president's office of this institution. Dr. Augustine Choi, current dean of the Weill Cornell Medicine, joined our institution several years ago and did not know personally, I believe, Dr. Daly, but he has graciously agreed to come down to the podium and share some considerations and comments with us. Thank you, Dr. Choi.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Unlike many of you, I was not fortunate to have known Dr. John Daly. I've heard a lot about him, his reputation, and some of the amazing memories that some of you have shared today. It's clear that he was a man, an individual of enormous talent, a great doctor, a leader that all of us aspire to be. And he was its giant in the field of surgical oncology, a visionary chair of Department of Surgery with tremendous impact on trainees, faculty, and staff and students. We are saddened by his loss. So I will turn now to introduce to you Dr. David Hajar, who at that time was Dean of the Graduate School and Vice Dean of the Medical School, who knew Dr. Daly quite well. Dr. Hajar now is currently the University Professor, the Executive Vice Chair of the Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine, and Dean Emeritus. So Dr. Hajar will share some of his remembrance about Dr. John Daly. David?
Thank you, Augustine. And I want to thank Dr. Michelasi for inviting me to speak at this memorial service to celebrate John's life. John and I got to know one another when Bob Michaels and David Skinner hired him in 1993, and he and I became very quick friends. John was as we all know, a very kind man, a very interesting man, a real scholar and gentleman. And during the early years when he came to Weill Cornell, he was put on many committees by the dean of the medical school at the time, and that's where I got to serve with him. And I found him very institutionally thinking. He was an individual who could think strategically, and when we were on either search committees or on the committee of review, he was always very, very helpful to all of us. And he and I became very good friends. Because of the search committees that we were on and the other activities for the medical school, we'd go out to the usual dinners afterwards, and I really got to know John. And I found him to be very interesting, a real classy guy, an individual, of course, you'd want to have come into your home and spend some time to really get to know you. And he became part of the Cornell fabric very quickly. On a personal note, my family and I will always be indebted to John. And I think about John in this way because when he came to our institution, my mother developed colon cancer, extensive colon cancer. And I asked John, could he do the surgery? And he did. He did the surgery. It was a very successful surgery. And he basically gave my family 20 more years of my mother. And we were very, very grateful to that. His surgical skill sets clearly allowed us to spend more time with my mom, and she lived to almost 100 years old. So we were very, very grateful to John. And every time he would see me, he'd see me in the hallway, he'd say, how's your mother? And I'd say, my mother's fine. We're still enjoying her cooking and we still enjoy her company. And I'll always be indebted to this man for what he did for my family. John left, as we know. He went to become dean in Philadelphia. And for the first year or two, if I recall, we would hear from him. I would hear from him about some faculty recruitments that he wanted to do from New York. Did I know them? What did I think about them? He'd call Tony Gatto. And he kept like an academic lifeline to our institution, even when he went back to Philadelphia. So it's sort of like we kept in touch. And I was very, very saddened to hear that John had passed away this year when Fabrizio called me. I mean, that was a tough time because I really liked him. And he not only was a great academician, scholar, obviously a great surgeon, but he was a very, very kind man to us. I didn't grow up with him like some of you did. I didn't train with him. I got to know him pretty much in the middle to late stages of his career, and we became quickly great friends. So those that cannot be here, that worked with him closely, that really liked him, people like Ralph Nachman, Tony Gatto, Wayne Isom, my wife Kathy Hajar, Phil Steig, people that got to know him have all told me they were very saddened to hear about what happened with John. So John, we will miss you. You were clearly a great figure in our institution's history.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hajar. As mentioned already several times, in 2002, Dr. Daly moved back to Philadelphia, a recurrent theme, to become dean at Temple. Let me go back to the late 60s in Philadelphia when a mutual friend introduced John to Mary Bonner. They began dating, and you have heard already they married. They married in 1971. And as you have heard, they ultimately raised 6 children: John Jr., William, Brian, Timothy, Patrick, and Maureen. We're fortunate today and delighted to have Brian and Tim with us. Maureen, as you already have heard, was supposed to be here. And when I called her, she said, I'll be delighted to be here, but remember, I'm pregnant and I'm due mid-September. So I'll be there, hopefully. Otherwise, you have to understand that I won't be there. And indeed, she texted me yesterday and she sent me 2 beautiful pictures. Maureen, as you know, as you've heard, was our resident in general surgery here, was the administrative chief resident during her last year. She spent 2 years in research with Dr. Fahey, and then ultimately she spent 1 year as a endocrine surgical fellow. And she just graduated at the end of July this year. And she called me yesterday and she sent me a text and she said, first, that she was going into labor, and second, that everything went well. And she, yesterday, on her mother's birthday, and the coincidence did not escape me, on Mary Bonner's birthday, she gave birth to John David Moore. And there's a little story about this John David Moore. Maureen confided to me that John Daly, John, kept asking her or suggesting to her when he knew that she was pregnant and she was carrying a boy, that, David, that would be a good name. David would be a good name. David, and Maureen said, I don't like David. And so I think once, unfortunately, John passed away, she said to me, well, that was a way for me to force me in calling this newborn somehow David. But considering everything, obviously she chose the name of John David Moore. And you could say, as I said yesterday to Patty, the cycle of life starts again. So as Vinny Malhotra already has mentioned, and Michael Lieberman has already mentioned, John, yes, was very grateful to be a surgeon, to be a physician, to serve patients and everybody that he could reach to, but probably considered his family his greatest accomplishment. He told many individuals that, and they obviously told me as well many times. We were colleagues. In National Surgical Society. Both John Daly and I were president of the Society of Surgical Oncology. We're both members of the American Surgical, so we saw each other quite often. And in many of those situations, he told me how much he really loved his family and how family really came first and before everything else. So it is with personal pleasure that we have Brian and Tim here. And if you want to come to the podium and share a few thoughts with us, I would be really grateful. Thank you.
So before I start, I just want to say that Tim and I and our brother Patrick is here too, along with John, Bill, and Maureen. We're at all of those Christmas parties. And each of those Christmas parties, we were expected to be on our best behavior. That said, when a lot of physicians get together and there's tons of free alcohol, we didn't have to do very much to be on our best behavior. That's when I'd like to see the physicians let loose a little bit during those nights. And our dad, later on in the evening, he didn't curse as much except when the boys did something wrong, which is actually quite frequently. But next to that, those nights, I would hear a little bit more language from him, but I think that was because he was having such a good time at the Christmas parties. So on behalf of the entire Daly family, we want to extend our sincere thanks and gratitude for those delivering remarks today, all of you. They've really been wonderful and quite touching, and we appreciate the video. It's always nice to see our dad again and to see him with our mom and the 17 other pictures with Maureen that are up there and none of us. Noted. But we're grateful to Cornell for organizing this celebration. It's, I think like all of you, it's been quite devastating for us and difficult. And these remembrances, you know, they bring us closer to our dad, who we of course miss every day and think about him every day. But it is so joyous, I think, for us to hear how he's impacted all of your lives and the impact that he's had, you know, not just in Cornell, but in many surgical societies and patients as well. So thank you very much. So have you ever read a really good book, a book that's hard to put down, a book that ignites feelings of compassion, empathy, and humility? A compelling story that helps us feel a greater sense of connection to one another by reinforcing our highest ideals, such as love, laughter, and purpose. We are all writing our own figurative story every day, yesterday, today, tomorrow. The story of who we are, the biggest events in our lives, our relationships with family and friends, our careers, the meaning we attach to our lives, our purpose. So like all of us, our dad wrote his figurative book every day, but he also wrote a literal book last year titled The Making of the Man. In the dedication section, he spelled out his purpose for the book, writing, "It has been written simply to tell the story of how I came to be the person I am and how the events of my life shaped me. On reflection, I've been very blessed with a surgical career during which my patients taught me to be compassionate and skilled, and with a strong, loving family who stood by me in difficult times, celebrated with me in happy times, and shared with me the truly important things in life. In his book, our dad encouraged us to write our own story, to pass along our story to our children and to our grandchildren, but to pass along his story as well, with one special request, that we are kind in the telling. So in today's celebration of his life, we've taken the liberty of condensing the chapters into 3 essential themes that we believe capture the true essence of our dad's life: love, laughter, and purpose. Chapter 1, love. The love for our dad was and remains deep and filling. Each of us would say to him, "Dad, you are not only my dad, you are also my best friend." 6 children, each with different personalities, as Patty knows, but all sharing the same best friend. Our go-to for advice, mentorship, comfort, conversation, and source of unconditional love during the difficult times as well as the happy times. His smile, his hugs, his excitement at seeing us or hearing our voice. We felt and still feel his love. And we simply loved being around him, and he was around us, and perhaps even more so around his 11 grandkids. As our dad noted in his book, his patients taught him to be compassionate, but they also taught him humility. He learned and felt that humility through his own experiences as a husband to our mom during her 14-year battle with cancer, during which Dr. Lieberman was one of the surgeons, as well as his own experience as a patient, particularly the vulnerability and helplessness around needing and eventually receiving a liver transplant. Our dad was a student of life. The lessons he took away from these experiences and others was to be more generous in expressing gratitude, be more comfortable with being vulnerable, to touch the shoulder or hand of all of his patients, and to be more intentional in communicating love. Dr. Robert Leslie, an ER physician, wrote in his book, Angels in the ER, "I know without a doubt that life is fragile. I've come to understand that humility may be the greatest virtue, and I am convinced we need to take the time to say the things we deeply feel to the people we deeply care about." Our dad, as he so often did with us, led by example. We felt his love and we heard his expressions of love. A favorite expressions of our dad's is, "To love another person is to see the face of God." Life is fragile, and our dad left the physical world way too soon. But his lessons live on in each of us, his family, his friends, and those patients for whom he cared. An expression not in our dad's book, but one with which we would wholeheartedly agree, is that love is laughter. Lots and lots of laughter.
So chapter 2, laughter. James Joyce wrote, "They lived and laughed and loved and left." We laughed a lot with our dad. He was a master at the combination of quick wit, corny dad jokes, and sarcasm. He loved to laugh, and we loved to laugh with him. Being funny in the Daly family is a necessary survival skill, as the peanut gallery is constantly ready to pounce on the jokes that fall flat, are mistimed, or provide material that can be used against them in a court of law. Our dad was not afraid to enter this terradome. He again led by example with his willingness to start with the jokes, but also be comfortable on the receiving end. There was always an initial sense of surprise from our friends when they first met our dad and then watched as we would tease him. They would say things like, "You must be really comfortable with your dad," and we were. But in a short time, they would see that our dad gave us as good as he got, and then it made sense to them. Our family thrives together. Enjoy these juxtapositions. The 2-time dean of Temple's Medical School, who when asked by one of his kids in a moment of seriousness or worry for them about an ailment or illness that they were experiencing, would straight-faced reply that we had Fraggle hoppers. Now, many accomplished doctors in the room and on the live stream, I don't think anybody would stand by Fraggle hoppers as a proper prognosis. But this, of course, is a totally made up word. He would finish his jokes with the words, "This is the worst case that I've ever seen." Sometime after he was done appreciating his own joke, he would make an accurate diagnosis and get us the best care, which most often would come from him. The Harry C. Donahue Professor of Surgery, who found the humor when presented with a bar bill on a family cruise that had $700 in alcohol charges, all signed by Maureen Daly, who was 9 at the time. The Daly boys still plead the fifth as to who is responsible for those outrageous alcohol charges. The former Lewis Atterbury Stimpson Professor of Surgery and Chairman of Surgery at Weill Cornell, who would dress up as Santa Claus every Christmas for his grandchildren and hand out presents with his pants entirely too loose and his Santa impersonation marginal at best, simply to have them all laugh and say, "We know it's you, Pop-Up." He would then reply with a, "What? Pop-Up who? I am Santa Claus, ho, ho, ho." Undoubtedly, the times we most look forward to and will continue are getting together for events, holidays, and celebrations. Our dad was the organizer of these gatherings, again, leading by example. But the lessons are not lost on us. We love being with each other, laughing, and getting closer to finding our purpose. Which brings me to chapter 3, purpose. In a speech to Howard University graduates, the late actor Chadwick Boseman said, "Purpose is an essential element of you. You would rather find purpose than a career or a job. Struggles along the way are meant to shape you for your purpose." Our dad lived purpose, and not just in his career, but in his life. In the big accomplishments, of course, but more importantly, in the small gestures and emotions, the call to say hi and see how you are doing, the medical advice to family, friends, and strangers, the pride in seeing medical, graduate, and PA students celebrate their graduations, the joy in playing games of tag with his grandchildren, the comfort of his hug, the happiness of his laughter. His purpose was to live a life of faith, to live a life of putting family first, to live a life of learning, to live a life of caring for others, to live a life of impact and meaning. These were what he defined as the truly important things in life. Our dad was a man of God. He rarely missed attending a weekend mass as it centered him in what truly mattered. He also led by example in his commitment to lifelong learning. At 72 years of age, he took the recertification exam of the American Board of Surgery. Why? He wanted to stay true to his commitment to excellence. He told us he wanted to die as a board-certified general surgeon, and that is what he did. He passed that exam with flying colors. He cared for others without question. Many former patients, family members, friends have reached out to our family in these past 6 months to describe how truly selfless and caring our father was and how comforting he was as their doctor. They're confident. They described his bedside manner as one of a true gentleman with the humanity and knowledge one needs in an excellent surgeon. We have been amazed and humbled to hear the many stories that start with, "Your dad saved my life," or "Your dad saved the life of my wife, my husband, my parent, my friend, my colleague." You can fill in the blank. Helping others was at his core. It was part of his purpose.
Our dad truly led a life of impact and meaning. You might take a moment to consider how our dad, John Daly, impacted your life. How did he manage to weave his way into your story? Perhaps it was as simple as a letter of recommendation or a return phone call about a medical issue. Perhaps it was helping you find a job or giving you advice. or perhaps he simply made you laugh when you heard his strange Southern twang or one of his jokes. Today's celebration provides a wonderful opportunity to be reminded of how our dad positively impacted our lives. His impact on our family will always remain with us. Our dad walks alongside of us. He holds our hands. He helps us find our way. He leads by example. We thank you again for being part of today's celebration of our father's life. We have two final thoughts to share with you, maybe three. First, we believe the more complete title for our dad's book is John M. Daly, MD, The Making of the Man Who Loved, Laughed, and Lived with Purpose. Second, when you remember and tell stories about our dad, as you did today, be kind in the telling. He'd be happy to know you all complied with his request. And then we'd like to conclude with an excerpt of something our dad wrote to us before he passed, because we think it is absolutely meant for you too, his friends, colleagues, patients, and family members. He said, "I'm with you always, in your smile, in your laugh, in your pause to remember where it was you heard that phrase you just used. You are my dreams, my legacy, my hope for the future. I am there for you always, to watch out for you, to calm your fears, to relieve your stress, to make you whole again. And when the time comes for you, I will be with you, to walk with you through the shadows into the light. I am your friend, protector, and confidant. Your husband, Dad, and Pop. Thank you. And thank you to all of you today."
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. Thank you very much, Tim. And I'm sorry, didn't know that Patrick was here as well. Thank you for being here. This concludes our memorial celebration for John Michael Daly. And so in this last few words, allow me to express our most sincere condolences to his children, his second wife, Palma, and his family. And thank you all here and on Zoom for your participation to this celebration of John's life and accomplishments. Thank you.